A central bank just made an unbelievable statement and is actually defending Bitcoin. Yes, you heard that right. There are now central banks that are speaking out in favor of Bitcoin, that even want to publish a report saying that Bitcoin is good for a central bank's balance sheet, that are pushing back against FUD, and all of this is happening in Europe. They're telling me Bitcoin isn't for criminals, Bitcoin isn't drug money, Bitcoin isn't for terrorists. Just take that in for a second. Normally, we always hear these massive accusations. Oh, Bitcoin is so bad, it's bad for the environment, it's bad money, it's for criminals, and blah, blah, blah. Always the same arguments. And now, here comes an actual central bank president. Let that sink in. The president of a central bank who is speaking out in favor of Bitcoin and just telling it like it is in an interview that we absolutely have to watch. Guys, this might just be the craziest Bitcoin twist ever, that now even central banks are jumping on the Bitcoin bandwagon. That's game theory. First they laugh at you, then they ignore you, then they fight you, and then you win. And now we've reached that point. The central banks can't keep pushing it away any longer. The central banks can't keep fighting it any longer. You can't fight it, so you have to join in. And that's the final level, not just individuals getting FOMO, not just companies getting FOMO, not just countries getting FOMO, but when central banks get FOMO. Central banks are realizing, yeah, you can't ignore it any longer. We need Bitcoin on our balance sheet. And they're even arguing that having it on the balance sheet actually improves things. The balance sheet is better with Bitcoin than without. I mean, that's a no-brainer, an absolute no-brainer, but it would basically be an indirect criticism of your own currency if you start relying on Bitcoin here. And that's why we're going to take a look at what this central banker says and why this video is so explosive. But first, hit the like button below if you want to see Bitcoin succeed. We are our own bank. If you stand up for your own sovereignty, then hit the like button below, because we don't need to be dependent on central bankers, politicians, or any clowns who manipulate our monetary policy. We stand on our own 2 feet. We are our own banks. We are our own strength and power. So make sure to hit the like button below. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit the subscribe button too. And you can go ahead and guess which central bank it is. I'm going to show you now. It's the Czech National Bank. We've heard this from Michel here before. He's the president of the central bank. He's made some pretty bold statements in the past, but I don't think he's ever made a statement as strong as this one. Let's listen directly to the clip to hear what they have to say. But first, just a quick note. I actually have to read the beginning out to you because it's in Czech. I translated it, and honestly, the translation of the first 5 seconds is crap. So what he's saying here is that money laundering can be done with Bitcoin, with the crown, with the euro, and with the dollar. And that's a matter for the police. So basically, he's telling you that money laundering isn't inherently tied to Bitcoin. Theoretically, it can happen with anything. Money laundering could even happen with gold or whatever else, for all I care. Czechia's central bank chief, Aleš Mikl, is defending Bitcoin. Money laundering works with all sorts of things. He wants to modernize the central bank digitally and is sticking with BTC as a way to diversify the foreign currency reserves. And now, check out this clip. But we need to keep developing the bank technologically. Well, I see things a bit differently. How so? I'm interested in technologies. And then I'm interested in diversification. So the central bank needs to be restructured, and now just listen to this. He says he's interested in technologies, and here he clearly means Bitcoin. That means, for him, Bitcoin is clearly a technology as well. That's always the big difference. You can always tell what level someone is operating on by that. If Bitcoin is simply labeled as a speculative asset or something like that, then you can clearly see that these people have no clue. Or if, for example, Bitcoin is seen as magic internet money or something like that. But if someone sees Bitcoin as a technology, then you know they've really delved deep into the whole story. And then, of course, Bitcoin is also a form of diversification. We can see from all the statistics that the risk-adjusted return is going up. That means we have less risk with a potentially higher return. And that's an absolute no-brainer. And there are also studies showing that, let's say, in a risk-adjusted optimal portfolio, adding about 3, 4, or 5% Bitcoin, something around that, that way you end up with a portfolio that has very, very low volatility, but still maximized returns. Of course, if you say volatility doesn't matter to you at all, then you can obviously go heavier on Bitcoin 20, 30, 40%. But then you also have to deal with the fluctuations that come with it. That's something you need to be aware of as well.
The portfolio is for our bank, so that we can simply offer the public a diversified portfolio. On the asset side, we have 130 billion euros. We buy gold. We're making an effort to bring the gold back to the Czech Republic because it was completely sold off.
And that's exactly what central banks never explain or never tell you about. That means they always say, okay, we're buying gold here and gold is a good reserve asset. But he's getting right to the point. He has so and so many billions in reserves here, and they've partially sold off the gold, or the gold is already abroad, and then it has to be brought back into the country. And then it's not even stored in their own central bank, but because the safe storage here is very, very difficult. And that's what's so crazy here, that Bitcoin gives you such massive self-sovereignty, especially compared to other reserve assets. I don't want to badmouth gold now. Gold is also a cool asset as a reserve asset and has many other advantages. But Bitcoin is just pristine collateral here. Bitcoin is simply pristine reserve money because we can just store it here on our own hardware wallet. That means we don't need any third parties. Instead, we have our own hardware wallet. I always say, get yourself a TREZOR. I'll put a link down here, also super important. There's currently a promotion, 20% off if you order a TREZOR now, specifically the TREZOR Safe 5, which is the brand new version and the one I personally like best. So, of course, it has the most features, but there are also other cool TREZOR models out there. So, check it out below, use the code BitcoinHotel, use the link down there, and you'll get all the discounts. Then you're all set, and you can basically do more here than the Czech National Bank and other central banks, who always have to rely on some custodians, sometimes even storing things abroad. And I mean, in Germany, they have the same problem. The gold still hasn't been completely brought back to Germany, and it's the same in other countries. We're also seeing all these massive shifts right now, where it's being announced that Fort Knox will be audited. All of a sudden, we've seen the whole world shipping gold back and forth. There simply isn't enough gold in the central banks because people suddenly realize, oops, there are somehow 100 times more paper certificates here than the underlying asset, which is gold. And that's exactly the problem that Bitcoin fixes, especially since we can transfer all the money and all the monetary power instantly back and forth. And these are exactly the real-life problems that Bitcoin fixes. Then central banks basically just have to put 2 and 2 together, and Michel, he does that. He's done his homework. He also sees the advantages compared to gold, and that's really significant.
We buy stocks. We want something of us to remain, so that when the next governor comes along, he or she simply has better conditions than I had myself.
So he also says that the reserve conditions right now are not optimal. They simply want there to be more purchasing power in the future, and for that purchasing power not to diminish. And he does say they buy stocks, but probably they also see the potential in Bitcoin here, that Bitcoin could outperform stocks. That's the next thing. That means Bitcoin definitely has the potential to outperform stocks, and even at lower risk.
That means low inflation, the bank's assets, well-diversified assets of the bank, well-diversified assets, and then a rational management of the bank's operations, the running of this institution.
So basically, everything is completely different from how central banks operate worldwide, like the Fed or the ECB and so on. That means rational reserves, rational fiscal policy, low inflation. Okay, of course, that's what every central bank says too. But if you also rely on hard assets here, then that's obviously the counterpoint. That means there are always 2 approaches you can take. You can either be very, very expansive, inflate the fiat money system endlessly, or you can really go back to a hard money system. That's always the discussion too. Okay, will the US switch to a hard money system, or will other central banks move to a hard money system? But most of the time, it was always just speculation. The way it looks now, though, the Czech Republic is really going all in. This really is an absolute game changer, a turning point. There's just no other way to put it. We really haven't seen this happen very often. Normally, Christine Lagarde, what does she do? She also takes shots at Bitcoin. Here, Jerome Powell is relatively neutral, but what do other big institutions do? The International Monetary Fund, the Bank for International Settlements, what do? They all take shots at Bitcoin. And as soon as Bitcoin shows even a little weakness, they pile on even more. But all of that has only made Bitcoin stronger. And what fits really well with this right now is that the US Senate has introduced a new law or bill calling for sanctions against El Salvador. And El Salvador is also always heavily attacked because they act very independently and keep buying Bitcoin. And they're targeting Bukele's regime, El Salvador's Bitcoin purchases, and their exchange activity, that is, the fact that they're buying Bitcoin on exchanges. And yeah, the whole thing is supposed to be sanctioned. You can hear Bukele here too. Look. Ha 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 ha. The Democrats are salty here, so they are very much in place here, and it probably comes from the Democratic camp. You can see it here now, the whole bill. We won't look at it in detail right now, but I skimmed through it a bit and jotted down a few keywords. That means they're basically making the case here that the US is increasingly seeing this whole story as a geopolitical threat. Of course, not everyone. I don't think this is coming from Donald Trump, more likely from the Democratic side. Bitcoin could make countries like El Salvador more independent from the US dollar, and that's something some people might be worried about. And the US government seems to fear that other countries could follow, and that would mean a loss of control. So, if El Salvador becomes independent, then other countries might follow. And it's the same with central banks. If the Czech Central Bank becomes independent, what happens then? Then other central banks will do the same, Argentina and so on. Or countries might even get rid of their central banks entirely. And what does that mean for the ECB? What does that mean for the Fed? They're out of a job, they can't redistribute power anymore, they can't exercise power anymore. These are, of course, huge instruments of control. The digital euro is at risk, CBDCs are at risk, digital ID is at risk. That means the entire apparatus of power, control, and steering would be broken here. An apparatus that benefits very, very few people, but where a whole lot of people end up losing. Bitcoin would turn that around. A whole lot of people would be winners, and only a very few would be losers. And these are the people who have already been exploiting humanity for centuries through central bank monetary policy and centralized power structures. And in the long run, all of this will be bullish for Bitcoin because states will be forced to take a clear stance, whether they want to participate in this new development or stick with the fiat cartel. I mean, the US also has a really interesting approach where they're kind of trying to connect both worlds. They basically say, okay, stablecoins are the link here, the connecting element between the central bank and the digital world. That's definitely very interesting too. But in reality, it also means that they're not really making a decision yet. So the US hasn't decided here, neither for Bitcoin nor for the dollar. They're basically continuing with both options. But now there are central banks that are more likely to make a choice and say, okay, either on this side or that side, or maybe not central banks yet, but countries. For example, El Salvador seems to be leaning more towards Bitcoin, but they can't fully go through with it because then they'd be pressured by the International Monetary Fund. Now there are threats coming from the US, although it seems like Bukele doesn't really take them seriously and actually treats them more as a joke. And that means the US wants to use laws to brand Bitcoin as a geopolitical weapon. El Salvador is the target, but it won't be the last. This is actually a summary that was still standing here. But you also have to say, it's not the US in general, but probably really the Democrats here. I don't know. Feel free to write in the comments below if you know more details about whether this is part of Trump's agenda. I can hardly imagine it. Trump and Bukele are buddies, after all. They know each other very well. Bukele even takes in some of the inmates from the US here, including serious criminals. That's why I can't imagine that all of this is coming from Donald Trump. Donald Trump actually benefits a lot from El Salvador, because it seems that El Salvador and other third world countries are somehow better at imprisoning criminals than the US itself, since apparently the prisons in the US aren't as good as those in El Salvador. I don't know, honestly, I have no idea. Feel free to write in the comments below how you see the whole thing. Yeah, and if you still want to buy Bitcoin, just like the central banks here, I'll put a link down below to 21 Bitcoin. Here you can buy Bitcoin easily, securely, and with no hassle. With the code BitcoinHotel, you can still get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin. Guys, see you next time. Until then, peace out.